Okay.
Okay, I need you all to go back and say the exact same things.
No. Well, no. Well, Jim, I think we listed off some things that that could be done, and you mentioned sort of some of the high points. But I think one piece that we haven't talked about is what's the signal that this sends to the rest of the Navy when there is a public case like this, and there really is no accountability other than the loss of the job, which is kind of a no-brainer. But then what happens when that officer collects a pension, collects a paycheck for several years? That sends a signal to everybody else that hey, the Navy didn't take this seriously. And I think that's one of the, as this article or this interview sort of gets out there, one of the things that concerned me is that the reaction could be, whoa, this is not a huge problem, right? It's a very isolated case. And so therefore, it's not worth the effort to address it. And I guess my argument against that would be, look at the other two folks in the discussion here. That's one ship with 5 department heads, 20 division officers, 20 chiefs, and 300 sailors who went on to lead hundreds and hundreds of other sailors. And that was their example. And so it's sort of the fruit of the poisonous tree, if you will, that it only takes one. And if something were not to change, it's hard to see how that doesn't happen again, that we don't have another naval officer on the cover of Navy Times and the cover of Time magazine at some point. And so, I like the Navy and I like the people in the Navy. I'd like to spare them that. If some of the things that come out in this discussion help to that, then great.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, let's, I think we've kind of come full circle, and you guys have already addressed some of the final questions that I had. I was struck, the three of you mentioned several times over the course of this discussion about the importance of defining the problem, defining the traits of a toxic leader. A second idea, engagement with peers and subordinates. Defining the impact of someone that's a toxic leader, trying to educate the entire community. And it does seem like it's a very large agenda to try and get the Navy to somehow have something in place that they can name all these things, rather than just like what you were saying, John, a situation comes up and then they try to clean up. So if you have these other things in place first and have a way to define and understand the problem, the result of that cleanup it's going to be have a different feel to it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It sort of gives it a bit of a concrete structure rather than it being a case-by-case basis dependent on the individual who's making that call.
Yes,
I think that's kind of what we're about, is what's our organizational structure that won't let this type of leadership survive and even thrive, right?
Right. The last thing I wanted to mention, and we'd gotten cut off there, was about, so let's say in the future, all of these things are in place and you've done a good job defining and educating and raising awareness, all of that, and you do intervene in a person's career because you've identified them as a toxic leader. The last kind of piece of this is what happens to that person. Are they moved to a different track? Are they relieved of command again? Are they asked to leave the Navy? And I'm sure down the road, if this whole issue gets traction and structure, that there'll be ideas in place to define that, and what would be the options. I
think that's a good point. I think the most important thing is remove them from that situation where they can do harm. Stop the damage, and then maybe relook our post damage control actions down the road is, what's the level, what's the impact, and what's the right, we have those structures in place. I think if we go back to our initial premise that you can better define it and better, put something in place to make it clear that that's what happened, that makes that second decision much easier as to what's the disposition of that individual down the road. What you don't want to have is they get put in another place where they're in charge of people, and that's a distinct possibility if that doesn't if it isn't handled properly.
In the case of Holly Graf, if these things had been in place, one would hope that there would have been an intervention far sooner, with people being able to openly talk about it rather than just keep moving her up the chain of command until there's a real crisis.
No, absolutely. There was an opportunity at the XO level, at the O5 command level, and then as an 06 as well. So there were at least 3 possible intervention points there that it could have been more consciously and more deliberately put in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, I believe in this particular case, it was a cultural and leadership management issue, as the department heads, to my knowledge, did try to bring these issues up with the commanding officer. And the response was always that, he supported the XO and that was the end of it. So they would have had to then bring it above his head, for lack of a better word. And that's just a really hard cultural thing to do. And I think there would kind of have to be training on some of these scenarios. And
well, that's a good point, Nicole. Is, as a commanding officer, one of the things you're charged with is training that XO to move up. And so to have the XO fail could be perceived as your own failure. And so, you get to that point, you kind of say, well, I can fix them, or I can be the yin, their yang, and balance it out. And so that it really puts the commanding officer in an awkward position. Literally, in my naval career, the XO-CO relationship, the closest thing I have to that is a brother, sister, or a marriage, as far as how close you get to that individual and how much you trust them. And so, it's very difficult to cut against that grain,
Right. And I think in this example with the Commander Graf and the captain that we had on board for most of her tour, they were not, from my perspective, they were not very close at all. And I can attest to what Nicole said. As department heads, multiple times we went individually, I know I did individually multiple times, and as a group, to complain about the XO. And we always got, I support the XO, I support the XO. And even though it was just completely unreasonable, I just couldn't comprehend, why would you support that? It just didn't make any sense, and it still doesn't make sense to me. But I know in that particular example, she was not close with the captain, because sometimes I'll give you a sea story. Sometimes when you went into a foreign port, which we did all the time out of being a ship out of Japan, you had to have a buddy system, and that was for the XO too. So of course, the morning of the sea and anchor pulling into port, we're at the XO meeting, and the XO, she needs a buddy because she doesn't want to be with the captain. So she's fishing to the department heads, okay, who's going to be my buddy today? And we always sat on her couch in seniority order. So she started me, CSO? Oh, sorry, XO, I got plans. And she'd work her way down to WEPS. And he seemed, he always got kind of stuck. And,
right.
But that just goes to show, she did not want to be with the captain either. So I don't believe, I never saw personally, I wasn't around them continually, but I can't recall seeing any mentoring from the CO to the XO. I think he just, he was the type of CO where he stayed in his cabin.
Yes.
And we never saw him, especially in port. We never saw him in port. I think he was a proficient ship handler. We never went aground or anything. But at sea, he'd be between his cabin and the bridge, and in port, we would never see him. He'd be stuck in his cabin. So he wasn't out and about walking the deck plates like I think he should have been.
Well, it just shows how one of the traits of the toxic leaders is there are some positive cultural norms in place, and such as this relationship that John talks about between the CO and XO, and the toxic leader goes in and that's busted up. It just, you know, and then the effects that that has. So, you know, the toxic leader is not fitting into the positive cultural norms and modes of behavior and rules and regulations and things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Great point. So it affects upwards as well as downwards in the organization.
John, I know it's hard to find an end to this, but you kind of inspired the interview and the discussion. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Hey, thanks. So, you know, I think the most important one is to thank Nicole, first of all, for putting this story out there, right? I mean, I can't imagine. I think it took you how long to write it? You know, 10 or 15 years.
8 years, yeah.
Tough decision to publish it. And then and sort of change the names, and but it was pretty easy to figure out who it was, and then to Kirk out of the blue to reach out to me after I wrote the review, to me really sort of left me with the impression that there was more to this than just something that happened in the past. And as you mentioned, I have written about leadership, and I've seen, you know, I always tell people I kept a book of, hey, I'm going to do this stuff on this side of the book, and I'm not going to do this stuff on the other side. And we all have that. I'm sure somebody kept a book like that, and I have entries on both sides for people that work for me. But at the end of the day, you become better by learning and by looking at mistakes and by transparency. And so that's where I thought it might be worth cultivating this a little bit more. It's resulted in 3 friendships, and some good stories, but I think some great lessons. You know, Kirk's tale about the midshipman who read about it and made that connection. I mean, when it becomes personal, and you have a story to tell, then people listen, right? And so that's, I think, what inspired me to kind of pull this thread.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah, thanks everybody for participating, and we'll proceed from here and do the written interview, the video interview, and possibly work on the article too.
All right, Jim. No pressure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks, guys. Good night.
Thank you.